Politics without the soap opera, with unfiltered constitutional conservative truth. The Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz.
And welcome back, fellow taxpayers, to the one and only Conservative Review podcast, increasingly the only source of independent conservative news and views in the political arena. And really, the question is, what does it mean to even be a conservative? I think to you guys, it's not really a hard question to answer. I think to most Americans who might not even consider themselves conservative, they understand what it is, and they frankly live lives that are very conservative, but they are not presented at an elite political level with anything that could be described as conservative, so they're turned off and they get involved in the false choices between the two sides and pick different sides. Some want to just respond to Trump and they're upset with him, so they'll vote straight Democrat, and vice versa. And we're going to keep doing this until the end of times. But our agenda here is to ensure that as my gray hair spreads, by the time my hair is completely gray, we're not stuck in the same rut, the same false dichotomy, albeit the consequences of the far left policy outcomes will be so much more severe because, as we noted yesterday, they still persist, they still succeed, even when Republicans are in power. And yes, it is Tuesday, and I was originally going to have a guest today, but we're going to have a special guest tomorrow, so we're still going to be solo today. I want to continue on some of the themes from yesterday's show, so if you haven't listened to it yet, you might want to start with that one first. But really to continue along the theme of what is it that we are conserving? What are we conserving anymore? Someone, and I forget who, and I apologize, but one of our listeners sent me a great line that Republicans are essentially progressives driving the speed limit. And that's the title of today's show. They are progressives driving the speed limit. You know, a lot of people tell me, well, Daniel, come on. You can't tell me that they're like the Democrats. The Democrats are nuts. Like, no, there's got to be a difference. Well, there is a difference in the respect that the Democrats are those guys that look like they're on meth, wild-eyed, driving, 150 miles an hour like an illegal alien on drugs and alcohol, crashing into someone. Yeah, they're kind of, driving the speed limit. As Steve Deace, my friend, always says, using their turn signals wherever they can. But they land in the same place. They land in the same place. Whether it's healthcare, Medicaid, entitlements, spending, education, ethanol, cafe standards, the role of government itself, the role of the courts, foreign policy, immigration, crime. They land in the same place. Whether they'll be as wild-eyed about it as the Democrats is immaterial to this discussion, because they ensure that the Democrats succeed. Often they help them. Sometimes they don't necessarily actively help them, but they enable it, and they certainly don't stop it. And whereas maybe at a given snapshot in time, Democrats might, in nominal terms, be worse, the Republicans themselves will get you to that destination in 6 to 8 years from now. But then we'll be told that you have to, ensure the Democrats don't win because it will be even worse. And so on and so on. That ratchet keeps turning inexorably in one direction. So first thing we'll start off with today is the article we have at a Conservative Review. Spending for the first 2.5 years of the Trump administration, a little bit more than that, first 33 months to be exact, is 13.2% higher than the equivalent 33 months of Obama's first term. Now, as always, I get these like Amelia Bedelia nerds on Twitter. They'll be like, well, Daniel, it's not exactly the same. You got to look at the spending to GDP ratio. And look, there's different ways of expressing this. And there's different ways of demonstrating that it's not quite as much as the shock value of that title, which is technically true. But they're missing the point. We had under Obama just a shocking level of spending. You all remember it. It was a decade ago. It spawned the Tea Party movement. You saw all the signs, stop spending, prop up throughout the nation. We were just shocked by it. It was like nothing we've ever seen since World War II. And we just couldn't believe it. And here's the deal. You have to remember, there might be ways to say that maybe the spending, when you factor in inflation and GDP, it's not quite as devastating as under Obama. But at the same time, Obama was dealing with 10% unemployment. So if you look at the equivalent 33-month period, so right now we're February, I'm using the first full months of the Trump administration. So February 2017 through October 2019, just last month. We're in the middle of November now. By my calculation, I added it up using the monthly Treasury statements. We've spent $11.762 trillion in outlays. If you tabulate February 2009 outlays through the equivalent period October 2011, it was $10.3 trillion. This is 13.2% higher. Now, I used the way OMB expresses constant 2012 numbers to adjust for inflation. It would only be about 3.2% higher. So full disclosure, and I put that in the article. If you factor in inflation, it would be about 3.2% higher. But still, that's success. That's conservatism. That's conserving. The most shocking period of expansion of government under Obama. We're like, okay, well, if we're adjusted for inflation, it's only 3.2% higher. And if you compare to GDP, maybe it's even a little bit lower. But here's the deal. That's when we had 10% unemployment. You had all sorts of people on unemployment benefits, which in itself cost tens of billions of dollars at the time. People were on food stamps, and obviously you have all of the factors. You had revenue was down enormously. So in other words, whereas spending is now 13% higher in nominal terms compared to that period of time, I calculated revenue is now, what is this? Almost 50% more. Back then it was 6.3 trillion. Now we're taking in 9.3 trillion. The economy is roaring. We have we'll see in a minute, roaring in a certain way. The job market's good. We have 3.6% unemployment compared to Obama's, 10% unemployment. So the notion that in any terms, inflation, GDP, whatever, we would be any close to the most liberal president under the worst recession, 10% unemployment, as compared to under the Trump administration and Republican dominance, trifecta control for the first 2 years of government, with 3.6% unemployment, that is unprecedented. That's the point, that we would have spending at this level, however you express it, whether it's a share of GDP, maybe it would be around, 21% of GDP, or if it's in nominal terms, adjusted for inflation. No matter how you express it, it's unprecedented for a period of virtual full employment. What is it we're conserving? And yes, it is true that the major driver is Medicare and Social Security, but that in itself is an indictment of Republican control. What are we conserving? We're supposed to deal with that. Oh, and if we're too scared to deal with that, at least we would make a commensurate amount of cuts in Medicaid, other welfare, and discretionary bureaucracy spending to at least kind of offset that, meaning one of the two. But what they did is that they blew the spending numbers on everything except for ICE funding and deportations, by the way. When Republicans had control over two branches of government. That's my broader point. Don't sit and send me these Amelia Bedelia tweets and emails. well, it's not exactly the same. Well, yeah, in some ways it's not exactly. In some ways it's even worse because back then you had 10% of the workforce out of jobs, and revenue was in the toilet. So it's understanding you'll have deficits like that and more, increased spending. What is it we're conserving? Even Republicans at their annual retreat, what was the one thing they accomplished in 2017? Tax cuts. They had one more year left of trifecta control. Remember, Daniel, but they didn't have a filibuster-proof majority. Well, they had budget reconciliation. That's how they passed the tax cuts. They refused to use it. If you remember, we reported extensively on it in 2018. They could have at least done welfare reform. And again, don't blame it on Trump. So then, I'm not going to praise Trump and I'm going to hit him on this, but then other people will use my work and say, this is Trump's GOP. No, Paul Ryan busted the budget caps before Trump did. Trump at least has an OMB director, Russ Vought, who is pushing hard for spending cuts. At least he put out a budget like that. Now Trump wound up not sticking by it. But if you would have gotten a Paul Ryan type of Republican, they wouldn't have even put that on the table. And Trump administration was very open to welfare reform. Now, ultimately, they didn't push it hard. And certainly Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, all these guys, they promised at the GOP annual retreat in January 2018 to do welfare reform. It was the perfect message to the public. Look, it's tough to do it when you have 10% unemployment. But we had record low unemployment, near record low unemployment, dipping below 4%. We could sit and go to the American people and say, look, join the job market. Don't sit on welfare without work requirements. There's one thing when there's a recession. Now there's so many job opportunities. Go and take the job opportunities. You need a paycheck, not a welfare check. Talk about losing suburban voters. Suburban voters aren't going to die on the sword of more welfare. That's not what they need. That's not what they want. That would have been a perfect message. But no, they did nothing. So, you didn't have to deal even with Medicare and Social Security, at least if you would have dealt with Medicaid and the other stuff. And that leads me into the next discussion, which is healthcare. What did Republicans conserve? They conserved Obamacare. Remember in 2017, Republicans like, Medicaid, we can't cut Medicaid. Republicans had a perfect opportunity to go before the American people and say, look, Medicaid is nothing but lining the pockets of the insurance and healthcare administrator cartel. 75% of it is administered by public, not public, but it's really this quasi-private healthcare administration, managed care. They're getting rich off of it. They're distorting the market. They're creating monopolies off the backs of programs that were supposed to help the poor. It's harming everyone. And then here's another thing. There's so much waste and fraud. Remember, Republicans said, and Trump himself got into this, waste, fraud, and abuse. And you know what that means. That means you're going to do nothing. When you're not going to systemically reform these programs, and you're like, well, we'll go after waste, fraud, and abuse. In other words, you're doing nothing. That's when we said, look, Trump, for all the talk of him being so novel, typical GOP establishment talking point. Typical Paul Ryan talking point. But the irony is, when you go and you shovel it through a cartel, you're going to get fraud because they're going to milk it. You guys know this if you have elderly parents with Medicare, but it's the same thing with the poor and Medicaid. When there's no accountability, the hospitals and insurance companies, it's just one big thing. They just milk it. The hospitals milk the insurance companies milk the taxpayers. And they'll just bring in 50 people for 3 seconds to visit a guy who's dying, and they'll charge $1 million. And then you have so much fraud. There's a Wall Street Journal article. It's really more of an opinion piece. Brian Blaze and Aaron Yelowitz. Medicaid expansion was a key component of Obamacare. In 2014, when the expansion started, the Fed stopped doing audits of states' Medicaid eligibility determinations. And they basically say our analysis of the CMS report suggests that the expansion appears to have more than tripled the amount of improper spending in the program. 20% or more of Medicaid spending in 2019, an amount likely to exceed $75 billion, is improper. Before Obamacare, the Medicaid improper payment rate was 6%. That's a huge deal. 20% of the entire Medicaid. I mean, most of it's improper because it's inflated, market distorted garbage, as we always talk about here. But when they define improper, they mean completely fraudulent. It's just totally, fraud. $75 billion. In other words, the fraud in Medicaid is the cost of the entire food stamp program, which in itself is very expensive. $75 billion. That's what this has wrought. And Republicans refuse to give a conservative vision. As we always said, you want single payer? I'll give you single payer. Patient to doctor. Cut out the middleman. That should have been the rallying cry. Cut out the middleman. Cut out government. Cut out the parasitic insurance and healthcare conglomerate cartel. Patient to doctor. Oh, Daniel, what if you're poor? I have a whole plan, and we'll put it up here on the screen. You could see here on the screen my article I wrote a few years ago, My Medicaid Solution. What we would do is I wouldn't even cut $1 of Medicaid. I would freeze it at what we're spending now. And rather than funneling it through a market distorting government quasi-private racket, I would put it in private picture like HSA type of accounts. All Americans would have them. If you can't afford it, we'll freaking give it to you. Again, we're already doing it anyway, but at least let's do it without the market distortion. Real briefly, and I don't mean to get into this completely today, because there's other stuff I want to get to. I don't want to focus all on healthcare. But we've said before that what Medicaid needs to be done is, rather than selling it like draconian cuts and this and that, simply run Medicaid like we run food stamps. That's all we ask. Give them the money, the same amount. You take the average, and I have the numbers in there. The average we spend on a single, a family, and a disabled, people that are disabled, and you just give it to them in an account. Heck, I'll give them even a little bit more. And you could purchase any combination of unregulated insurance, which we would get rid of the mandates. If you're disabled and you have pre-existing conditions, it's not that you can't get it. It will be more expensive. So we'll give it at that higher rate. A mixture of DPC, out of pocket, whatever you want to do. And you come into a doctor's office, there's no stigma anymore because you have the same mix of whatever private or out of pocket or health sharing ministry like anyone else. So you take the stigma off. And, but here's the deal. You know what else you will cut? The fraud. You might have a little individual fraud, but you regulate these accounts. But it's nothing like massive corporations and nursing homes. I mean, all these stories with Florida nursing homes, billions of dollars that they milk the Medicaid system. $75 billion. You could cut spending, but the message won't be draconian like, oh, we're taking away from you. No, we're cutting out the parasitic insurance cartel. We're empowering you to take control of your healthcare. And you know what? Over time, if you did that, the prices would tumble. Everyone would pay at without a third, fourth party. So you'd have price transparency, let the competition begin. And over time, you wouldn't need to even do draconian cuts because the amount we would have to fund would go down. This is just a glimpse of one guy in his 30s who by no means is a healthcare expert. That's what conservatism means. But Republicans are like, no, Medicaid. Oh, we love Medicaid. Oh, no, remember that whole fight in 2017, which is why they wouldn't repeal, one of the reasons they wouldn't repeal Obamacare. So we conserved Obama's baseline spending and added to it. We conserved Obama's Obamacare. We conserved all of his Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley and the cafe standards. Now the Trump administration gave in. They promised to cut it. And look, to his credit, he was willing to fight it, but we don't have a counter movement fighting as much as the environmentalists are pushing back the other way. If the court's getting involved and we don't fight judicial supremacy, so the few things that Trump is legitimately trying to do, well, judicial supremacy, so that goes out the window. What is it we are conserving? And as we noted yesterday, social issues? Heck, you got Chick-fil-A now joining the Rainbow Jihad. And a lot of that is because at a political level, we don't make the Rainbow Jihad pay a price. We don't fight them rigorously. Republicans don't want to be caught dead. So look, from Chick-fil-A's vantage point, they see one side mobilized. And from a business standpoint, I'm saying, I'm not defending them, and certainly I'm done with them. I'm just saying, from a corporate standpoint, you can never be too pro-homosexual agenda, pro-transgender this, pro-criminal this, pro-refugee this, pro-open borders this. The other way, they see you'll get your head bitten off, but there's no counter movement. That's where we are. What is it we're conserving? I talked yesterday about the fact that the very Republicans that are responsible for this, when we finally get a primary challenger, the establishment gets Trump to endorse the bad guy, and no one's fighting for the guy. Garland Tucker, who's challenging Tom Tillis, a total progressive in North Carolina. And one of our listeners, Steve, thanks for your help on this, sent me, he said, hey, you didn't mention this, so I'm mentioning it today. Last October, CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, literally an arm for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, unindicted co-conspirator in a terror finance trial. They had their 24th anniversary. I guess this year was their 25th. And a bunch of congressmen wrote letters, praising them, marking their anniversary. Everyone, it was about 100 of them, was a Democrat. There was one Republican, Senator Tom Tillis. You can see, I'm pleased to extend my best wishes to everyone gathered at the Council of American and Islamic Relations. Religious freedom is foundational to the American system of government and has rightly been called our first freedom. Our nation proudly cherishes the freedom of religion, where all are free to peaceably practice, teach, observe their faith, and fund terrorism. Oh, whoops, he didn't say that. Again, put your turning signal on, drive the speed limit, land in the same place the Democrats landed. And Trump's supporting him. Trump probably doesn't even know about this. What am I supposed to do? Why should I get hyped up about this? And friends, what really scares me about what's happening, and I'm going to be a little cryptic here. Some of you might know what I'm referring to. I know some of you have emailed me about this. But a fear that I have, and I think some of you have, is that we're headed to Europe's style of politics. And what I mean by that is Europe has, and this has been that way for quite some time, where they have a left that is essentially communist, de-civilization, no borders, multiculturalism to the nth degree. And then you have a right that is in response to some of those de-civilization things, but it morphed into nothing but just an ethnocentric kind of white nationalist parties, even neo-Nazi parties. They're not for limited government. A lot of them aren't even so much for traditional biblical values, more than maybe traditional cultural values, which we might agree with when framed properly. And sometimes we'll ally with, whatever, but that's not what we want American conservatism to be, if you know what I mean. In other words, we don't want America to be, let's say Germany. You have the Social Democrats. You have the Christian Democrats. A lot of people don't realize Angela Merkel's party is not the left party. That's the conservative party. So you have two left-wing parties and then a bunch of some neo-Nazi types. And well, where does that leave normal people? you don't have that in Europe anymore. Are we headed in that direction in America, where because none of the conservative intellectuals in this country have given a vision for what conservatism means, or if they have, they haven't demonstrated how and when to fight for it? So either people just get caught up into the conservative establishment, which is nothing more than clickservatism and a money-making machine, or they're so disgusted by it, they just respond emotionally in more of a responsive fashion and not a proactive, affirmative fashion. Here's what I believe. It's more like, I'm going to do things just to react. So I'm going to start coddling certain people and certain ideas that aren't really good. In other words, like, let me give you a straight up example. Tucker Carlson. Tucker has, really more than anyone, most people, has introduced some good dialogue into this debate, much needed dialogue on a lot of issues. But what he's done is, because on paper, the past corporate libertarian conservative intelligentsia has been associated more with fiscal ideas, and they've thrown everything else under the bus, he's like, you know what? In some ways, I'll adopt Elizabeth Warren's fiscal ideas and, fight on crime and immigration and yada, yada. But it's a false dichotomy because, as we noted, the Paul Ryans were perfidous on fiscal issues as they were on immigration and the homosexual agenda and yada, yada. They didn't, if you understand true free marketness, like the way we explain healthcare and spending, it fits seamlessly with our views and cultural issues. And it's very easy to give over to the people. It's something they feel we need to, so I don't need this European style right. But I'm just telling you, that is what's going to happen if we don't seize our own destiny. We live in an era full of false dichotomies, full of reacting to the reaction of the reaction, where no one feels comfortable in their skin. Explain to me what it is you want on a given issue, divorced from what your political opponents are doing. It might be valid to address what they're doing, and we certainly do that, but you should be able to give a vision of what you believe in without saying what I don't like about someone else. That's what we try to do here. But that's my concern, that a lot of people that think more or less like we do are rightfully looking at the conservative movement in its established way, and they're saying, wait a minute, what are you conserving anyway? So they're like, you know what, I don't need this conservatism. I'll find this nationalist populist, and I'm not so into labels. I don't care so much about labels. Sometimes it's semantics. But, people are going to start doing what I call ideological log rolling, where, well, because he's like that and I want to be like this, so I'm going to start adopting, some of these alt-right people with the anti-Israel stuff and the, they're being black supremacist and there's a war on whites, which, look, I will not shy away from that. I will call it as it is. There is a unrelenting war on whites, and the established conservative movement has failed to confront it in a legal sense, in a policy sense. I'm not going to shy away from that. And I don't here. But you'll have people that will then take it, okay, well, you want to be, ethnic centrism, so I'll respond with my own white identity stuff. Well, no, let's just cut all the crap out and actually, have true equality in terms of life, liberty, and property under the law. But unfortunately, we don't really have conservative figures and organizations to look at as a paradigm for this. So again, people are going to be caught up in a lot of false choices, the rubber band effect. Here on this program, you can count on me to be steady Eddie. We're always going to drive down that center lane. That's the irony. You could laugh, but I've always considered myself a centrist. A centrist means someone who is balanced. In other words, you have to take all sorts of factors and you balance them together. You can't be like, hey, I'm so worried about my image, I'm going to have this culture of throwing anyone on the right I don't like under the bus to virtue signal in front of the left-wing media, so I'm accepted as a respectable conservative. right? It is a true statement that when you start just silencing everyone, they're going to come for you anyway. But it's also true at the same time. You can't like go to the other extreme, like, hey, anyone who, is just totally into the Holocaust denial or whatever, I'm just going to embrace them. Because I don't want to start a precedent of, shunning anyone, because then it's, just going to fuel this. It's going to fuel the left's game of silencing people. You got to balance everything. Everything is a balance. Heck, I could write a book on that. It's true of religion. It's true of culture. It's true of everything. The lost art of balance. Everyone has to be part of a cult. But I think the silent majority, not just of Republican voters and people who identify as conservatives, but I really think the silent majority of certainly suburban families in America believe in most of what we believe in this program, this audience, but it's just never been expressed that way. And, you have these false choices. And a great example of how we're not conserving things and how we're giving into the left, creating false choices that need not happen, is the issue of crime. The issue of crime. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow with a special guest from the Manhattan Institute that's covering crime in New York, one of the few people like myself that's covering jailbreak. But this is a great example. I want to read to you. The Daily Caller Foundation has an article out from last week. Dem prosecutors fear for suburbs' safety as radical district attorneys fueled by Soros cash take control. And they show how even these were Democrats, but, they were prosecutors. So, I don't know, maybe they're pro-abortion. I don't know. Maybe they're, I don't know, for higher taxes, maybe. But they at least understand the need for law and order. And basically the story here is, what we're doing is not working, where Republicans are to the left of Democrat prosecutors. So what do we have here? This is from the Daily Caller again. Radical social justice activists will serve as the top prosecutors for 3 major Washington, D.C. suburbs, including 2 of the wealthiest counties in the U.S., after George Soros' Political Action Committee poured $2.1 million into ordinarily sleepy races. In Virginia's Fairfax and Arlington counties, the reformer attorneys ran on platforms far to the left of the Democrat incumbents, beating them in primary races before ultimately winning the general elections. In both cases, the incumbents expressed concern for public safety if the Soros-backed candidates took control. They also said the activists were pushing a national platform about racism and over-incarceration that had no basis in reality in the affluent liberal jurisdictions. And mind you, the American Conservative Union Foundation, or Criminal Justice Foundation, put on this conference 2 weeks ago, and you could scroll through their tweets. You go to the ACU Criminal Justice, just type that into Twitter, scroll down their tweets, and it's literally what Democrat prosecutors are warning about the Soros prosecutors. These guys agree with it. The race and over-incarceration, they say the same crap. We have the conservative movement, all of them. Any conservative organization. I was the last human being fighting this on the right. They have accepted this. Look at what that has taken off the table. Look at the issue and the confusion that has created. After losing the Democrat primary to Soros-backed Steve Discano, Fairfax's longtime prosecutor, Ray Morrow, warned his fellow party members that safety could be at risk if they elected Discano in the general election. He quit the party to endorse Jonathan Fahey, an experienced prosecutor who was running as an independent to try to avert a Discano victory. Quote, Discano is completely unqualified for the office of Commonwealth Attorney, Morrow said in a video. The only case he tried, he disgraced himself when the judge reversed the conviction because he lied in closing argument. This man is not fit to hold office in Fairfax County. I've dedicated 36 years of my life to keeping you safe in Fairfax County, and I've never asked for anything, but I love my country. I love this country, and I believe in public safety. I'm asking you vote for Jonathan Fahey for all the victims in this country. It's a Democrat. But Democrat prosecutors, I think, are where even most Democrat voters are. But here's what happened. Discano narrowly beat Morrow in the primary after receiving $400,000 from Soros. Morrow raised just $250,000 with no one donor giving more than $10,000. Fahey, who's the Republican turned independent, told the Daily Caller News Foundation, The weird thing is, listen to this. As a result of Soros pouring money into low turnout primaries, center-left voters are unquestionably more closely aligned to the Republican candidates than they are these radical challengers. If the citizens were informed, they would never vote for this. But he goes on to explain that people just went in and voted for party ballots. They tell themselves they're somehow sticking it to Donald Trump by voting for someone unqualified to be a local prosecutor. They want to make a stand, but it's like you have a chance to do that, and it's 2020, and it's self-destructive how Trump kind of owns the Democrats' mentality. We have a world right now where the president picks the U.S. attorneys and George Soros picks the top state prosecutors, and that's a scary world to live in. Quote, the Dem politicians don't actually want it to happen, but they're afraid to stand up to it because they don't want to be the next one primaried. And the Republicans, listen to this, and the Republicans, I don't know why they aren't willing to put resources into pushing back on this. I know why, because they agree with it. Here's the thing. And this is not just for saving criminal justice and defeating Soros attorneys. This is saving Trump and Republicans in general. Republicans have a problem. Suburban voters have soured on Trump. Okay? Certainly the center-left ones, but even the center-right ones, and that's the problem. How do you win them back? Well, it's tough. Everything is very politicized now. Even things that they previously wouldn't have supported. It's the ideological log rolling, so they'll take the opposite stance just because of Trump. But suburban voters, I've been saying this, they don't want this insanity. But they don't know it's happening. It's happening quietly. You guys didn't even know before some of us and myself, we started talking about it. It's buried in the news. Why? Because typically when one side does something so revolutionary, so extreme, the other side will just expose it and hit it. And that will generate a point of contention, that will generate conflict, and it will generate headlines. But what has happened is because Republicans and conservative libertarian organizations actually agree with it and are pushing it, and even the parts that maybe are too extreme for them, but because they generally agree with the premise, they're not going to push back. You're not seeing the Willie Horton ads. You're not seeing them pounding them. So you're getting this weird result where suburban voters are voting for like these like nutcases, but they wouldn't otherwise do that. Meaning this, it started in the urban areas, but it's happening in the suburban areas because Soros is getting it in the primaries, and then in the general election, they hate Trump, so they're just going to vote straight Democrat. But this is the way to win them back. What are we conserving? Nothing. We are worse off on immigration. We're worse off on crime. We're worse off on spending. We're worse off on healthcare. Those are the civilization issues. Sure as heck are worse off on social values. But it doesn't have to be this way. Precisely because the left is so extreme and out of step, if we had a movement that would provide a bold contrast and speak the truth to these issues, you would have a chance to win even with voters being upset with Trump. Anyone will tell you, anyone involved in political science, polling, even the legacy media, the liberal media, you'll see plenty of articles on this. The voters are very uncomfortable with Elizabeth Warren and these people and where they're headed. And ultimately, when it winds up being one of them versus Trump mano a mano, and it's very clear, maybe they'll come back to Trump. But for now, with the midterms, when there's these sleepy local races that don't have much of a brand to them, they're going to vote against Trump. But it's not that every suburban voter has all of a sudden become Antifa, where they love MS-13 and they love criminals. That's just not true. These hoity-toity people living in Arlington, that these women who go to their yoga every night, they sure as heck don't want this crap in their neighborhoods. They might get involved in a certain amount of virtue signaling, not when it costs them their lives. That is the weak point in the Democrat coalition that's building. That's what a normal party would attack. But we can't, because the organization, among many others, that puts on the so-called conservative annual political action committee conference of record supports it, supports the Soros agenda. My friends, what is it we are conserving? You know what's so funny? These knuckleheads think, Daniel, okay, we're going to give up all the suburban voters by being weak on crime, but we're going to get some urban voters and we're going to get the black vote because they're going to see that we love criminals. And again, it's stupid anyway. Not only are you trading voters that are eminently gettable for voters that really are very hard to get, they're not going to vote for you. But anyway, most blacks aren't criminals, right? There's an overwhelmingly much higher rate of crime among blacks than other demographics, but it's not a majority of them. It's nowhere near a majority of them. And they're the ones harmed first by jailbreak. I could speak forever about that in my hometown of Baltimore. It hurts the suburbs and with the carjackings and everything, but the dead bodies are all blacks. So it's stupid. But anyway, what you're doing is by letting out all these felons, you're creating the Soros Antifa army. Look at this. New York Post, free drug suspect praises bail reform and endorses Cuomo for president. Cuomo got this guy's vote. An alleged Bronx drug pusher facing nearly 100 years behind bars gave Andrew Cuomo a glowing endorsement Thursday when he walked free as courts tried to get a jump start on the state's bail reform law. Cuomo for president, Jose Catano Jorge crowed in Spanish as he left the Manhattan Supreme Court without plunking down a penny in bail. Jorge, 47, had been held without bail while facing up to 96 years on charges of selling a controlled substance and conspiracy because he basically, he killed a guy with fentanyl-laced heroin, and he's charged with his murder. But now he can walk the streets for the duration of his trial. As he was leaving, he supposedly told one of this female New York Post reporter, outside, I beat blanks up like you. So that's real nice. According to the New York Daily News, they had a different variation of this. The lawyer for this Jorge guy tried to hush him up as he was like yelping in Spanish about Cuomo for president. And he said, "It's in my heart, bro. It's in my heart. I got to say it." Exactly. There's a lot of things that's in the hearts of career violent criminals. In their insufferable, incorrigible hearts. And you ain't going to get that out of there. But one of the things that's not in their hearts is to vote Republican. Jared Kushner stood before Republican donors in Jackson Hole, Wyoming at a retreat in August and said that, his stupid jailbreak reform is going to result in more Republican votes. It's again and again. We have another case out today with this guy who was wanted for 2 stabbings in a project in April 1997. Cops showed up. He shot eight rounds at them, striking one officer in the chest 3 times. Luckily, he had the bulletproof vest worked, so I don't think he was really injured. I'm assuming he wasn't. So he was charged with robbery, attempted murder, all sorts of things. And back then, we actually at least made people serve a modicum of time. He should have gotten life, but he got 20 years at least. A guy like that wouldn't get 20 years now. He'd get like 5. But he was out in 2017, and now he was picked up again on weapons and drugs, violent guy. He was let out, despite this history, $5,000. Imagine if we had a movement, a party, in every local and federal race, banging away at jailbreak, banging away at sanctuaries. I think enough suburban voters would weigh that and weigh their dislike for Trump's personality, and they'd see, look, nothing motivates people like their own safety. That's my own 2 cents. It doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot we can conserve. We can conserve our public order. We can conserve our values. We can conserve our true free markets, not fake free markets. We can conserve, I would say conserve our healthcare system, but there's nothing to conserve. You have to go much farther back for that. We can conserve our national sovereignty and language and borders. And we can do it all without creating some sort of alt-right, whatever people want to call that. But as long as we don't do that, we're going to have false dichotomies. That's my warning to you, and mark my words, it will come true if something doesn't change. But I need your help. I need you to keep sending me your ideas, your stories, your forgotten news reports on jailbreaks, sanctuaries, any other issue that you would like us to cover here. I have a limited amount of minutes in the day, so there's a certain, there's just a lot more I would want to do. If I had a team of 15 people, I would do so much more, giving a vision on so many more issues, exposing so much more. But I'm a team of one for now. So, I need your help. I need you guys to join this, not just as a show to listen to on your way to work, on your, doing a hobby at home, cooking, exercising, but also to be part of a movement. And, I'm not looking to make a name for myself and just splash headlines within a year. I'm looking to gradually build an enduring movement that's untainted, that's also relentlessly consistent and aggressive. What that looks like, I'm still open to your ideas, but we first have to understand that what we are doing now is not working, because we are conserving nothing but George Soros' political outcomes. Till tomorrow, thank you very much for listening.